Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. In this week's Torah portion, Moshe Rabbeinu recounts the gravest sin that occurred throughout the 40 years in the desert. And of course, that was the worshiping of the golden calf. And Moses describes how he was up in heaven with God. And God told him, go down because your nation has become corrupt. They have served a foreign god, an idol. And Moses describes how he came down from the mountain. He saw the Jewish people dancing around the golden calf. And Moses describes the moment that he took the 2 tablets and he threw them to the ground, smashing them before the eyes of Israel. And the famous question on this story is, how dare Moses do something like that? Imagine a rabbi who gets angry at his congregation, and in his anger, he takes the Torah that he's holding, God forbid, and throws it to the ground? That's blasphemous. That's heresy. That's terrible. How could he do something like that? This is not just the Torah that was written by man. It was written by God, the 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets of stone. And yes, Moses was upset. He saw them worshiping a golden calf. But how do you take God's handiwork with the 10 Commandments on it and smash it into little pieces? And one of the deepest, most profound answers I once heard to this question is that Moses knew that he wanted to pray for forgiveness for the Jewish people. He wanted to plead with God, as he subsequently did, to forgive the sin of the Jewish people. And indeed, he succeeded in bringing about forgiveness and atonement for the Jewish people for worshiping the golden calf. But Moses understood, if I don't feel their pain, if I cannot truly empathize with them, if I cannot be standing with them, praying not just for them for myself as well, I will not be effective in my prayers. And therefore Moses smashes the tablets. You know why? Because our rabbis say that anger is tantamount to idolatry. Because when you lose your temper, when you get angry, especially if you break things, it means you have for a moment forgotten about God. Because if you trust in God, you don't get angry. You trust God's plan. And therefore Moses said, what can I do to put myself in their shoes, to put myself in their midst by committing an act of idolatry? If I smash the tablets in anger, then I too, on some level, have committed the sin of idolatry. And then when I pray for the Jewish people, I will not just pray for them, I'll be actually praying for myself, and then my prayers will be more effective. And what this story teaches us is the power of prayer and forgiveness, but also recognizing that sometimes we too, in a minor way, commit some of the gravest offenses, including idolatry itself. When we get angry, when we lose our temper, when we forget that God is in control. Sometimes people say, things are out of control. No, they're not out of control. They're out of your control. But they're in God's control, and never forget that. There was a woman who was a Holocaust survivor, an elderly woman, and she related the following story. She said, tragically, the Nazis rounded up the Jews and put them in the cattle cars. Her parents were murdered before her eyes, and it was just her and her little brother put into the cattle cars, being taken off to the concentration camps. And they traveled for hours in this compressed little car with no water, with barely any air. And then as they were about to get off the train, she looked down at her little 7-year-old brother and saw that he was missing one of his shoes. And she said to her younger brother, she was 16, he was 7, where is your shoe? And the brother said, I lost it. In all the confusion as the Nazis were rounding up the Jews to put them on the cars, his shoe fell off. And she said, I got so upset at him, I started to reprimand him and said, how could you lose your shoe? What's going to happen now? How are you going to survive? How are you going to get around with one shoe? Why are you such a schlemazel? Why did you allow yourself to lose track of where your shoe is? She said the doors of the cattle cars opened up. They came to Auschwitz. And that was the last time she saw her brother, as her brother was separated from her. And she said, I live with so much pain and so much regret that my last interaction with my brother, with my baby brother, I was his guardian. I was his only one in this world. He had no parents. He was an orphan already. And what was it? Words of anger, words of reprimand, scolding, scathing words. And I have to live with that regret that my last conversation with my brother was not taking care of him as a baby brother, loving him, sharing words of love and kindness, but words of anger. And she said, ever since then, anytime I speak to someone, I always ask myself, if this was my last conversation with him, could I live with myself for the rest of my life? Yes, the Jewish people worship the golden calf, but in our own lives, we may not worship golden calves, thank God. But we have to be careful to always remember that God is the one who is truly in control, and never lose our temper, because as someone said, if you add the letter D to the word anger, you have the word danger. Have a wonderful day.